Hey, I'm Taps. This is 0102 Studio, and I'm here to ask a question. Where are all of the small home theater receivers? So, I recently moved into a new home, and in the family room is this amazing building that houses a fireplace, space for a big TV, and shelves for books and speakers, and small cabinets below for like photo albums and whatnot. It's a beautiful building, but at closer inspection, there's a few caveats and maybe a few red flags for a home theater guy like me. And the biggest one being that the center column is about 15 inches in depth, and the side shelves and cabinets are about 10 inches in depth. Not a big deal, but my existing equipment, my home theater receiver, and my speakers just simply don't fit. I would have to look at some speaker options that would fit within the 10-inch shelves. But more importantly, and more of the bigger problem, is my receiver here, my Marantz. It just simply doesn't fit. And Marantz is traditionally one of the manufacturers with more shallow depth receivers. I mean, it's not overly deep and it fit perfectly well in our media stand in our previous home. But in this building, just doesn't. It kind of sticks out. So I had to go and find a new home theater receiver that fits a more shallow depth of 15 inches, while also featuring 7 channels because the building is, fortunately enough, wired for 7 channel sound. So I started hunting around for options, and there's not a lot. Most home theater receivers are large, chunky boxes, and I was only really able to narrow it down to 2 manufacturers, one being Marantz and the other being Sony. Marantz has a cool line of slimline receivers that mirror the look of their larger ones that are shorter in height and fairly shallow. And then Sony has a bunch of receivers that are still fairly tall but are decently shallow. But that's it. I ended up going with Sony. I believe it's the STR-DH790. It's a 7 channel receiver. It's shallow enough. I think it's 11 and a half inches deep, which fits comfortably in the space. It sounds pretty good. It's all right. I'm not here to bash or review the Sony receiver. I mean, I bought it. I'm happy with it. It works great. It's just at 549 Canadian. It, it sounds as good as it's priced. Like, I can just say that. I was used to the sound of this Marantz. It's the SR6009, and I bought it. Oh, geez, I think 2014. It was open box. I got it for about 16.99 Canadian at the time. Where now I think the equivalent Marantz, I forget the model number, but it's what 24.99 Canadian, which is a pretty big jump in price. And the sound scales appropriately in that price range. It's bigger, it's more muscular, it's more powerful. It is what it is. It costs more money. It's probably going to sound better. What I can't stop thinking about though is the sheer lack of options. I mean, I pretty much just had 4 receivers to pick from, and that was it. I would have thought in this day and age, with all the amazing equipment being released, that there'd be more. Uh, I mean, as an audio geek, I can't help but think about all the amazing Class D amplifiers that are out there. I mean, I've been guilty of scrolling on Amazon at night, just looking at amplifiers priced under $400 that I might be able to fit into my setup, or even just review on this channel. There's amplifiers like SMSL and Topping and Arylic, and there's also a lot of like one box setups. There's like Cambridge Audio's Yo-Yo, if they still make it. There's the name Muso. There's Marshall. There's all those Bose ones. There's a ton of those out there. So why not home theater receivers? Where are those? And before anyone jumps in and says, "Well, you can get a sound bar for all of those needs," yeah, I can, but I want home theater setup. And you can argue which sounds better. I'm not going to. If I'm looking for a home theater receiver that's small, I'm not looking for a sound bar. I'm just not. But it leaves the question, why not? I mean, from a fanboy consumer perspective, it certainly seems possible. So I'm kind of here asking the AV industry, What's the deal? Like, is this possible? Is it impossible? Is it just not cost effective? Is it not practical? What is it? This video is again in supplement to an article I wrote for Home Theater Secrets. And in researching for the article, I came across another article called "How to Save the Home Theater Receiver" written by Matthew. I can't pronounce your last name, and I don't want to screw it up or butcher it. And I almost stopped writing this and sent a letter to my editors of like, guys, I can't continue doing this. I mean, this guy wrote the article already years before, but it seems like it's a question that's been relatively unanswered to this day. And I also had like something I wanted to tack on to this, and I had a bit of an idea. And in order for me to kind of pitch you the idea, got to kind of talk about why. So to justify my stance, I'm going to be speaking from a sample size of one, me. And that's because I can't speak for the entire consumer base because I just really haven't done the research. And just, I could say that I think all consumers are thinking this, but I can't. What I can say, it's a big pain point for me. And if it's a pain point for me, there's got to be other people out there that are thinking the same thing. Right? And in order for my idea to work, we need to take a hard look at the AV receiver. Speaking in general terms, the AV receiver today is a big black box that's generally made out of plastic or metal sometimes, that features a ton of connections and is kind of a legacy design. Like, it really hasn't changed over the years. It's kind of function over form, and it's kind of ugly. I'm gonna be honest. It's kind of ugly. People have tried to design it, but generally it's not the best looking thing. But does it have to look like that? And I would say no. Taking off my home cinema enthusiast hat, I would say that what I would want is a cinema-like experience that doesn't cost an arm and a leg and doesn't force me to have like a furniture-sized piece of electronics in my living room kind of dominating things. What I want is a piece of electronics that fits into the home, doesn't call too much attention to itself, and lets me just enjoy a movie. And I want it to be small. Why does it have to be so big? If I just check on Google over here, it says a typical AV receiver needs to have an audio decoder for multiple channels, a video section, a video card, Class AB amplification, a tuner, calibration hardware, DACs, a bunch of chips, switchers, a heatsink, and a large power supply for all of that stuff. I mean, if I take NAD's like M10 BlueOS kind of streaming amplifier, it's a really small box. It's sized at about 8.5 inches wide by 3.5 inches high by 10.25 inches deep, and that's pretty small. I assume, because I haven't seen it in person, that NAD is stuffed like the power supply inside the unit as well. In an effort to get it even smaller, they could have probably taken this power supply out and made the size even smaller if they wanted to. Speaking of clutter, let's get rid of some things. Like, if I use this as an example, dude, what is this? That's so much stuff. Let's be honest, when you unpack an AV receiver for the first time, there's going to be a lot of you that think the same as me of just like, who uses all of this? In my Sony upstairs, I only use 2 cables, and I probably would only use one, but I have 2 cables that are taped together with really sticky tape, and I just didn't undo it. But I'm using, I don't know where it is on this, but I'm using an HDMI ARC, ARC, and an optical. And those are the only things I have plugged in from the TV to the receiver. And I'm not going to plug anything else in. And so all the other connections on the back, I'm just never going to use. And again, I'm a sample size of 1, but I'm not saying just have 1 connection, but you know, I don't need all those connections. And I definitely have never used 60% of the connections, maybe 70% of the connections on this thing. So what if we ditch all the connections we don't use and just stick to the essentials? In this day and age, most smart TVs feature all of the streaming capabilities. So why would you mirror that in the receiver? Let's just take that out. I also put together a list of some spring cleaning that we can do. So let's just go through that right now. AM FM tuner. Now, by streaming services, by sound modes, like club, hall, and jazz. Who the hell uses that stuff? That's gone. Component audio and video. I've never used that in my life. I've always just used optical or coaxial. All of but one analog input. Like this guy's got, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think it's a phono. 7. Yeah, 6 analogs. That's too much for a hi-fi amp. I've never used 6. So let's just knock it down to 1. HDMI inputs. Oh, this has 10 HDMI inputs. I'm gonna say 3. We're gonna use 3 this time. I mean, I have HDMI ARC 1. If you have a game console, maybe that's the second one. What the hell's the third one? Like Blu-ray, if you're super keen, yeah, sure, Blu-ray. But 3. Here's 3. Oh, this one's 3 outs. Maybe a contentious one, but again, I'm not looking to make the enthusiast home theater receiver here. We're gonna kill the pre-outs. Headphone jack. Let's get rid of that one. Trigger ins and outs. For anyone that doesn't know what those are for, like me, like 3 years ago, if you have trigger inputs and outs, you can connect it to other associated equipment and turn one on, and it'll just turn all the other ones on. We're gonna get rid of that. Internal power supply. I mentioned that before, and I'm gonna say it again. Let's take the power supply out of the box to make it smaller, and we'll move it externally. Physical buttons on the front fascia. That takes up space because there's got to be internal parts that connect to those buttons. I'm going to say, let's get rid of that. Next up is the remote. And modern AV receivers come packaged with sometimes like parts bin remotes. This Marantz came with this guy. It's an orgy of buttons. I mean, there's so many on here. And other manufacturers have like more simple remotes, like the Fluence AI61 that I talked about has a really simple remote. I mean, granted, their functionality of the powered bookshelf speaker is quite a bit different than an AV receiver, but there must be a way to slim the remote a little bit. The Sony, actually, that I just bought has a remote that's about this size, features far less buttons than the Marantz does. Granted, it has, again, less functionality, but there's got to be a way to maybe cut those down a little bit so that, once I got familiar with this remote, I can kind of just use it without looking at it. Whereas this one, I just didn't look forward to ever using it. Or just put the remote on the phone and just, I'm always on this thing anyway. Bad habit and bad for my health and all those things, but yeah. Here's some things that we should keep. Bluetooth and wireless. Amazing. PC USB, meaning you can connect your PC directly to your receiver. That's kind of cool. USB-C, because, the standard now, sort of. Network in, that could be cool. It could be connected to your power supply that's external now. 2 digital inputs, 1 optical, 1 coaxial. HDMI ARC, again, 3. Oh, and a small selection of surround formats. A lot of times your receiver just defaults or reads whatever the signal is playing in, and there's all these other ones that your receiver doesn't use. Don't put them in. Let's just not do that. Room calibration software, speaker connections, subwoofer outs. Oh, and either it's a full color display up front or nothing. What if there was just nothing up front? I don't know about you, but if I'm watching TV and then there's this bright display below the TV, it's kind of distracting. And what's on the display? What's the volume? I mean, I don't need a box to tell me what the volume is, but I have ears for that. It's either loud or it's not. I don't need a specific dB value listed on my home theater receiver. Also, it's we're playing in Pro Logic's 2, and it's who gives a shit? I don't care what surround format it is. I can hear what's happening. Other than that, what's on the screen? There's kind of no reason for it. But, people like screens, so you can have a screen, and maybe we'll just go with screen for now. But Personally, I don't need a screen on it. Just maybe there's a light on it that kind of indicates that it's on. I did a review for the Fluence AI 61s, and they just pretty much have a small light indicator that shows you that the unit's on, and you can dim that light if you want to, and that's it. That's the only light that's on there. And you can cycle through different modes, and it has different colors for whatever mode you're in, and it works great. I don't need a full display on the speakers to tell me that the goddamn thing's on. Like, who cares? So I would prefer no screen, but let's just go with screen for now. Next up is power. How much power do you really need? It's kind of been a long-standing thing that AV power numbers have been fudged a little bit, where like they're saying 100 watts, 7 channels, but it's really not. It's usually a lot lower than that per channel. Normally it's kind of rated with 1 channel driven, but who the heck does that? It plays 1 channel really loud. That's crazy. Anyway, so you don't need a lot of power. And for this sample size of 1 use case, we're going to go Class D. And, Class D amplifiers run more efficiently, and they don't have large transformers or capacitors. So that should help keep the size small. Now, let's make it sexy. I mean, it's a home theater receiver, but it's got to have to live in your living room. And there's a whole bunch of really beautiful integrated amplifiers out there. Let's maybe mirror some of that aesthetic and dump that into the home theater receiver. Let's start off with the front panel. I don't really want to flip this guy around. Let's start off with the front panel. Let's make it sexy. Marantz. I mean, I like Marantz's look of receivers. They generally look better than the more traditional home theater receivers, and I'm not going to critique the design other than these large volume knobs. In my design, I'm going to say I don't need a large volume knob. What does it do? It just turn the volume up and down? I don't care. I have a remote for that. Yeah, let's just kill the volume knob. Next one, let's ditch the black plastic chassis that we see on all the receivers. Let's put brushed aluminum or stainless steel or all white or something else other than the black plastic standard that's been seen for decades. Let's kill that. So yeah, that's how I would streamline the AV receiver. I think that would work. Is that possible? Is it impossible? Is it just not practical? Is it just way too costly to change the current model and introduce a whole bunch of other things? Or is it just not worth it? I'm all ears. I'm all ears. Just let me know. But Taps, what about that idea you had? Okay. What if we went modular? Now, let's just assume that all the engineering involved to take a receiver like this and shrink it down is possible, and it's somehow cost effective. Is it possible to add extra channels on the fly? Like, could I take a 5-channel slim receiver and then add on channel 6 and 7 later on? Could I add more than that? Could I add height channels separately? Could I add Atmos separately? Is any of that even possible? What if those extra channels were separate units that you add on separately with separate power supplies? Is that even close to possible? I took the liberty of doing a bit of R&D ahead of time just to save everyone money. Over here, this is our beautiful new slimline AV receiver. Up front, I don't know if you can see it here. If not, I'll run some B-roll so you can see it, but there's a beautiful little screen here, and around back, there's all the channels. Look at this. This is amazing. We have, or super stupid, but there's 3 HDMIs, there's your speaker connections, there's your power socket, there's optical, coaxial, subwoofer out, analog, USB, USB-C, PC input, and the Bluetooth module. And I've called it DAS receiver. Then, what if the extra channels were just like extra units that you could somehow like tack on. I don't know what the connection would be on the side, but each one would actually feature, its own power input and speaker connections and power within the unit. And then you could just connect it somehow, whether it's on the sides or on top. Again, no engineer, but I'm realizing how ghetto this looks as I'm talking, but we're going to put this video out anyway. And yes, these are built from, if you can tell, Nespresso coffee pod boxes, and there's 4 of them, there's 2 of them. I've been found out, but yeah. DAS receiver. So, am I crazy? Or is this even remotely possible? I don't know. You might. And for better or for worse, I just thought I'd put the idea out there and maybe it'll spark an idea in someone else, or at least some discussion. I'm Taps. This is 0102 Studio. Thanks for watching. But it does leave the question, why not? Ow.